Welcome, everyone. I'm Michelle Carbone, and this is the art of pivoting your life, breaking free, and crafting change. And if you'd like, you can call in for guidance. I'm really good at seeing things around relationships. And if you're just feeling stuck in any part of your life, I have a unique gift with that. So feel free to call in. The number to call is 516-623-1240. That's 516-623-1240. And in the meantime, I have lots of stuff to talk about, and I'm sure I won't get to all of my notes on this. But in my hypnotherapy and coaching practice, I have a focus on relationships, and specifically relationships that are traumatic. And there's two different syndromes: Cassandra syndrome and ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome. And they're very connected, and I'm going to focus on the ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome, which we can abbreviate as OTRS, since that is really long. And a lot of people don't realize that they're in this sort of dynamic. So my goal is just to educate people so they can maybe wake up and see what's happening in their relationship. And hopefully they can work towards healing that relationship, or seeing that it's not a beneficial relationship for them to be in, and to exit, whichever. I don't judge the decisions. I work with people who are staying in their relationships and working on it, and I think that's amazing. And as long as you're happy, that's all that matters. So we'll go ahead and dive in. So what is ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome? Basically, it's characterized by emotional, psychological, or physical harm that repeats over time. And a lot of people, I think of abuse as just being physical, but emotional, psychological, financial abuse is all very valid. And I know that for me, in the relationship I was in that was traumatic, sadly, there were times when I actually wished my spouse would harm me physically, because then I would have a reason to leave. And like, how messed up is that thinking? Like, I shouldn't have to wish for someone to harm me physically in order to leave a situation that I'm not happy in. Like, that's just that's the thing, right? This is the syndrome, is that you feel stuck. Most people that I've worked with OTRS and Cassandra syndrome are people pleasers. Most have a lot of codependent sort of tendencies, and being a people pleaser really affects you. And you don't feel like you have agency. You don't feel like you're allowed to put yourself first. You don't feel like you're allowed to be happy. You may not feel worthy to be in a relationship. That's healthy. And so some common signs of being in that kind of a relationship are, when you're with this other person, how do you feel? Are you fearful? Do you have anxiety around them? Are you walking on eggshells? Do you get a lower mood and feel depressed around them? Do you have trouble trusting other people? Do you feel like you just are stuck with them? Are you staying out of guilt? A lot of people that I've worked with are staying in the situation out of guilt, because a lot of times what's happening in these relationships, the reason why they end up traumatic is, and let me emphasize this, it's no one's fault. Okay, so I'm not blaming these various things that I'm going to be talking about. They just are what they are. So a lot of people that I've worked with are with someone on the autism spectrum, and it's not their fault. Like, it's different ways of thinking, it's different ways of the brain functioning, and no one's right or wrong in these situations, in my opinion. But what happens is you have these dynamics that are not healthy, because honestly, our society does not teach us how to have healthy relationships. In general, we're not taught how to communicate. We're not taught how to sit down and have honest and healthy conversations. And many of us don't even feel like we're worthy of expressing how we feel, or that, we we need to feel loved in certain ways, and to ask for us to be treated in ways that we want. So a lot of these situations happen with various mental health issues, which again is not necessarily anyone's fault here. But if you're with someone who has severe ADHD, or bipolar maybe, or borderline, or any of the cluster B personality traits or personality issues. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not quoting from the DSM, but we have these situations where their issues, which are not really anyone's fault, are causing this effect onto the partner. And a lot of miscommunications happen. When someone's struggling with their mental health, they're struggling themselves, and it's a traumatic situation. It's nobody's at fault, nobody's trying to do what they're doing, but these cycles that we get in are not healthy. So I don't focus on blame in my practice, because really I think relationships can be a place of healing. Relationships that bring up our triggers, that show us, like I've been triggered recently. When these triggers come up, they show us something that needs to be healed. And generally that thing is from our childhood. So these go back to being, like in my case, being very much a young girl who had a father who really wasn't present. And, I dealt with abandonment wounds from that, right? And then these abandonment wounds get brought up again as an adult. And if we're not doing the work, we don't realize that we're repeating the same thing. And the reason these things repeat themselves is so that we can heal them and then we can have happy relationships. And you'll never not be triggered. I'm just going to tell you right now. Healing doesn't mean you never get triggered. Healing just means that when you're triggered, like in my case, when I was triggered, I saw, okay, I'm being triggered. Let me look at why I'm being triggered. What's happening? Because my partner wasn't at fault. He did nothing wrong. And so why am I having these feelings come up? Let me look at that. But a lot of people who are in ongoing traumatic relationships, there's often a power imbalance within the relationship. So, in the case of my ex and I was definitely the one who didn't feel like I could express myself. Not his fault. That was, that goes back to other things, but I didn't realize it at the time. So you get one person who kind of has more of the power and control. They, maybe they own themselves, or maybe they're gaslighting. Maybe they have threats. Maybe they are physically harming you. Maybe they isolate you, and you end up losing all your friends, like in the case of many people that are with someone that has narcissistic tendencies, which is, kind of the popular thing to talk about. I mean, very few people actually have NPD, but there are definitely people with narcissistic tendencies, and those come about because of their childhoods. So it's like we're all just traumatized children walking around, harming each other, begging to be healed, and we just don't realize it. So we get in these cycles of abuse. So you might notice, like, do you fight and break up and get back together? Is there a cycle of you get in a fight and then there's a love bombing phase, where your partner apologizes and promises to do the work, and maybe they become the victim in the situation, because that sometimes happens too. And, if you've been in the healing world, you've probably heard of trauma bonding. And that's when you develop a strong emotional attachment to the abusive partner. It's sort of that Stockholm syndrome thing, basically. And you I think it comes from different places for different clients. So I'm not even going to go there. But, it's like you might not want to leave the relationship because you are struggling with guilt. You're struggling because you feel loyal, you love them, or maybe you're afraid to leave, or maybe it's even you don't feel safe to leave. You feel like you're safer in this, not beneficial relationship. In the isolation that I've seen with many of the women I've worked with, it really breaks my heart because they just get gaslit and emotionally abused in such a way that they feel like, they can't reach out to anybody, or maybe their partner makes their friends and family uncomfortable and their friends and family don't come around anymore. And because the partner that's, being abused is not strong enough, doesn't feel worthy enough to speak up for themselves. And then they just end up in this very isolated place, and they have no one that they feel like they can talk to about what's happening in their relationship. Emotional manipulation is huge in this, especially guilt, shame, blame, a lot of the gaslighting type of behavior, or even just turning things around, where it's like something that I've seen a lot is, the partner who's doing the harming will then be like, oh, I'm such a horrible person. Oh, you shouldn't be with me. And they are self-degrading in order to show you, oh, I know I'm so horrible. You shouldn't be with me. But they're really kind of manipulating you by doing that. Another thing is financial exploitation. A lot of times the abusive partner is the one in charge of the finances, and a lot of times you have these women who've chosen to be stay-at-home moms, which I think is amazing to get to stay home with your kids and hopefully, create a great environment for them to grow up in. And then, you're having to beg for $20 from your spouse to, go get ice cream. And it's the financial abuse that I've seen has just been mind-blowing to me at times. I was really, really lucky I didn't have that situation. And then also, we become desensitized to abuse. Like I said, we as a society don't really, at least when I was growing up, we didn't really emphasize like how someone treats you, how someone talks to you, how someone is, emotionally connected with you is important. It was all about like, oh, okay, well, if he hits you once, you leave. And, these relationships are very complicated and there's a lot of layers to this, because the person that's, I'll call the herder, is also hurt. The reason they're doing what they're doing is because that's what they grew up with. That's how their trauma is, appearing is that that's what they know. What they know is to gaslight. What they know is to manipulate, and it's really sad. It's sad all around, and so that's why I say, these relationships can turn around, and you can stay in them, but both people have to be willing to do some work, because both people are traumatized people. And I think it's safe to say at least 70-80% of people out there had some sort of trauma. And I'm not talking about only, oh, I was, physically harmed, I was, sexually harmed, whatever, but even just neglect. And I say just, it's, neglect is huge. We as humans need connection. We need our parents to care for us. We need to feel safe when we're growing up. And if we have a parent or both parents who are not around, who aren't supportive, who don't comfort us, who don't speak to us in our love language. I posted a video on my Facebook the other day about, children who, you're like, oh, don't coddle your children and hug them all the time. And it's like, no, like maybe their love language is touch. And I was really lucky that my mom gave me touch when I asked. That's my number one love language is touch. And I love hugs, and I love having my back rubbed and my hand held. And that's what I need in order to feel loved. And I was really lucky that I had a mom that gave me that. But I had a dad who wasn't around a lot, and he didn't. And if you're out there, dad, listening, I do love you, but things were how they were. And I don't blame. And that's the thing too. Getting yourself out of victim mode is one of the first steps, I think, to healing being in these kind of situations, and gives you autonomy and gives you control over what you're doing, instead of just being poor me, I'm the victim, and that person's hurting me and no one's here to save me or whatever, or trying to save everyone else. We all go in the victim triangle. You have the person who's the bully, you have the hero, and you have the victim. And when we can step out of that victim triangle and just look at things from a different perspective, we can start to take control over how we feel, how we think, and we can start the healing process. And most people who are who have OTRS are generally experiencing complex PTSD, and because they've been in long-term relationships that were harmful to their mental health and to how they believed in themselves, self-love, self-trust. And healing that takes time, and it takes different things. So while I love hypnotherapy, and that's, hypnotherapy and coaching is my main thing, I will tell my clients, hey, go do some somatic work, go do, some breath work, go do some other things, because we need to find the thing that's going to work for us and our bodies. If you haven't read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, highly recommend that book. The Body Keeps the Score should be read by every person in the United States because it is just amazing. And, he talks about how traumas are trapped in our body, in our cells. And, so we need to work on releasing that trauma, not only from our minds, but from our bodies. Many people in an ongoing traumatic relationship are experiencing hypervigilance, and they experience hypervigilance because they are, and that's kind of that walking on eggshells feeling, and it's because they are always on the lookout for the next event, the next thing that's going to harm them. And they're usually very sharp and very, kind of almost become psychic at what's going on, because they're watching body language, they're watching how people are speaking. So these people are constantly alert. They may feel an edge all the time. They're probably always, or they are in like fight or flight. But there's also freeze and fawn. For me, I fawn, and fawning is like, think of a baby deer. It's just hiding in the bushes. There's no smell. It doesn't move. It's just trying to not be seen. And that's what happens to me. I just shut down, and I'm a fawn, and I'm hiding, and don't look for me. A lot of people who are hypervigilant have heightened sensitivities. So lights, sounds, movements, and they may have an exaggerated startle response. So if you are experiencing that, you may be in a hypervigilant state. Maybe you feel unsafe. In spite of being somewhere safe, if you're hypervigilant, you may feel as though you are in danger or under threat all of the time. And that's going to lead to anxiety and even depression and distress. You may have difficulty relaxing if you're hypervigilant, because you can't let your guard down. Even when there's no way you're in danger, there's no apparent danger anywhere, your brain should let you relax. It simply cannot, because it does not ever feel safe. A lot of physical symptoms will appear as well. So heart rate, muscle tension, I have that. My muscles are constantly tight. It's a super fun thing. Sweating, shallow breathing, all of that stuff. And, when our heart rate increases, that is telling our brain, oh, we're in danger. And then vice versa. So it's this like very circular thing where it's very difficult to get out of that state with the heart rate, which is why working with your vagus nerve and breath work. So here's a tip with breath work is, when you breathe in, you are increasing your heart rate. And when you breathe out, you are decreasing your heart rate. So when you're feeling anxious, the reason why breath work will help is because you are going to breathe in, say for a count of 4, and you're going to breathe out for 6. And you are breathing out longer than you're breathing in, which is going to decrease your heart rate. Some other signs are excessive monitoring. So like if someone's constantly, looking around, they're monitoring what's happening around them. They may have difficulty concentrating because their mind is preoccupied looking for threats. A lot of times people in a hypervigilant state are going to be very irritable, and they're going to perceive things as being threatening that are not. Some people that are hypervigilant will experience avoidance. So they avoid certain places, people, activities, because they are perceiving them as being risky or triggering. A lot of people hypervigilant will also have insomnia. And again, that's the safe. Like if you don't feel safe, how can you sleep? And hypersensitivity to those loud noises, like we talked about before. That can be that very startling response. And breaking free of that is, it's important to understand that it's going to take time, giving yourself grace, giving yourself space, understanding that you're going to have to do some different processes. You're going to have to find what works for you. So journaling, therapy, having people that you trust, and even that, it can be difficult to find someone that you trust and to find someone that you feel comfortable opening up and being vulnerable with, because probably in the past when you did that, you were punished or something bad happened when you shared what you were feeling or thinking. And so that becomes not safe. And getting yourself in a safe place. If you're experiencing domestic violence, reaching out to a local shelter, reaching out to a counselor, whatever it is really important, because breaking free from the traumatic relationship is, if they're not willing to do the work and it's a situation where you're in danger, obviously getting out of that situation is very important for your healing, because you're not going to be able to heal in that relationship. You also need to learn about setting boundaries. And boundaries are so important, because that's where self-trust is going to be built, is by having boundaries and not allowing other people to cross those boundaries, or when they do, no longer allowing them access to you. And forgiveness is also important. I can't tell you how much forgiveness is important. Like, and a lot of people will argue with me about forgiveness, but forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is not for anyone else. So working on forgiveness is very, very, very important. And seeing it as releasing yourself from that trauma and the issues that you're having. And I'm guessing since my music's playing, I'm pretty close to the end here. Brian, how are we on time?
Thank you, Michelle. That was a great segment, and we can't wait to have you back on next week. And thank you so very much.
Appreciate it. Oh, and I'll give you my website real quick, just zenmindmichelle.com. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm always available.